The starship Endurance moved slowly through the darkness of space toward the shining world of Valanthos Prime. Commander Jake Morrison stood at the bridge window and watched the planet grow larger. It was a beautiful world covered in purple oceans and golden continents. This was the heart of the Galactic Confederation, home to the greatest alliance of alien species in known history. Humanity had been part of this alliance for exactly 50 years. In that time, they had earned a reputation as reliable but unremarkable members. Their ships were considered adequate. Their soldiers were viewed as brave but physically weak. Their technology was seen as functional but not impressive. The other species tolerated humans and sometimes even liked them. But nobody feared them or considered them. Important. Jake knew the truth was very different. He turned away from the window and walked through the corridors of his ship. The Endurance was operating at 30% capacity, just like every human vessel in the galaxy. The engines could push much harder. The weapons could hit much stronger. The shields could take much more punishment. But all of these systems had locks on them. Restrictions that kept the ship performing at a level the Confederation would find acceptable and unthreatening. Ambassador Lisa Grant met him outside the shuttle bay. She was a tall woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that had seen decades of difficult negotiations. She wore the formal blue uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps and carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who understood power better than most. "Ready for another summit?" she asked. "Ready to be insulted politely for a week," Jake replied with a small smile. Lisa laughed softly. The Courtney delegation arrived yesterday. High General Vorath is already telling everyone that humans should be grateful the Confederation allows us to attend these meetings. The Courtney were the dominant military power in the Confederation. They stood over 8 feet tall, with 4 muscular arms and bodies covered in natural armor that could stop most projectile weapons. They had conquered dozens of worlds before joining the Alliance and still believed themselves to be the greatest warriors in existence. Vorath was their supreme military commander, a creature who had lived for over 300 years and fought in more battles than most species had recorded in their histories. Jake had met Vorath before. The alien general looked at humans the way a lion might look at a mouse. There was no hatred in his eyes, just a complete certainty that humans were small and weak and utterly beneath his concern. Shuttle carried them down for the purple clouds of Valanthos Prime. The capital city spread out below them like a garden of crystal towers and floating platforms. Thousands of different species walked the streets and filled the air with flying vehicles. It was the most diverse place in the galaxy, a monument to cooperation between vastly different forms of life. Their landing pad was surrounded by delegations from a dozen worlds. Jake recognized the tall, thin Valanthi who served as hosts. He saw the aquatic Morendi in their water-filled encounter suits. The insectoid cricks clicked and buzzed in their strange language while translators turned their sounds into words others could understand. And standing apart from everyone else, surrounded by their own soldiers, were the Courtney. High General Vorath stepped forward as the humans approached. He towered over them, his 4 arms crossed over his armored chest. His face was hard and angular, designed by evolution for intimidation. When he spoke, his voice rumbled like distant thunder. "Commander Morrison, Ambassador Grant, welcome to the summit. I hope the journey was not too difficult for your fragile human vessels." Lisa smiled warmly despite the insult. "Thank you, High General. The Endurance performed wonderfully. We are honored to attend." Vorath made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Honored? Yes, I suppose you would be." The first day of the summit passed in endless meetings and formal ceremonies. Jake stood guard while Lisa navigated the complex politics of interstellar diplomacy. He watched the other species and saw how they treated humans. Most were polite but dismissive. A few were genuinely friendly. The Corthony made no effort to hide their contempt. That evening, a formal dinner brought all the delegations together in a great hall filled with food from 100 different worlds. Jake sat with his security team while Lisa worked the room, building relationships one conversation at a time. Lieutenant Ben Carter was Jake's chief of security. He was a young man with a calm face and steady hands, the kind of person who never seemed nervous even in dangerous situations. He had been with Jake for 5 years and had proven himself in a dozen difficult situations. What nobody in this room knew was that Ben was also one of the most dangerous hand-to-hand fighters in the human military. Varth approached their table with several of his officers. The Corthony general looked down at the humans with amusement in his ancient eyes. "I have been thinking," Varth said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "The Confederation holds these summits to celebrate unity and cooperation. Perhaps we should demonstrate this with a friendly combat exercise. Human against Corthony. A simple sparring match to show that we can compete as equals." The challenge was not friendly at all. Everyone in the room knew Vorith wanted to humiliate the humans publicly. A Corthony warrior against a human soldier would be like a professional fighter against a child. At least, that was what everyone believed. Ben looked at Jake. A then silent question passed between them. Jake gave a tiny nod. Ben stood up and faced Vorith. "I accept your challenge, High General. I would be honored to spar with one of your warriors." Vorith's officers laughed. The general himself showed his teeth in what might have been a smile. "Brave little human. Very well. Tomorrow morning, in the combat arena, the whole Confederation will watch." After the Corthony left, Jake leaned close to Ben. "You know what you have to do." "Lose convincingly," Ben replied quietly. "Make it look like I tried my best, but was simply outmatched." "Exactly. We cannot let them see what we really are." "Not yet. Maybe not ever." Ben nodded. It was not the first time he had fought below his ability. Every human soldier learned to hold back, to hide their true capabilities behind a mask of acceptable mediocrity. The restrictions were not just in their ships and weapons. They were in their bodies and minds as well. That night, Jake stood alone on his shuttle and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, beyond the borders of known space, something was moving. Human deep space sensors had detected strange signals in recent weeks. Ships of unknown design. Energy signatures that matched nothing in the Confederation database. He did not know it yet, but everything was about to change. The comfortable deception humanity had maintained for 50 years was about to face. A test that would reveal the truth to the entire galaxy. Whether the galaxy was ready for that. Truth was another question entirely. The combat arena on Valanthos Prime was an ancient structure, built by a civilization that had disappeared long before the Confederation existed. Its walls were made of some unknown metal that absorbed energy weapons, and its floor was covered in sand from a dozen different worlds. Thousands of spectators filled the seats. Representatives from every member species gathered to watch what they expected to be a quick and embarrassing defeat for humanity. Ben Carter walked into the arena wearing simple training clothes. Across from him stood a Corthony warrior named Torvak, a creature of muscle and natural armor who had won over 200 official matches. Torvak was not Vorith himself, but he was one of the best fighters the Corthony had ever produced. His forearms were each as thick as Ben's entire torso. His eyes burned with the confidence of a predator facing prey. High General Varth watched from a raised platform with the other senior delegates. Ambassador Lisa Grant sat nearby, her face carefully neutral. Commander Jake Morrison stood behind her, his hands clasped behind his back. The match began with a signal from the referee. Torvet moved fast for his size. He closed the distance in 3 long strides. and swung two of his arms in a crushing combination that would have shattered human bones. Ben dodged the first blow and blocked the second, allowing himself to be knocked backward by the impact. He rolled with the force and came up in a defensive stance. The crowd cheered for the KORTHANI. Ben fought carefully for the next 10 minutes. He landed a few strikes that did nothing against Torvak's armored hide. He took several hits that looked devastating, but which he actually absorbed with techniques no one in the audience could recognize. He made himself look brave and skilled, but ultimately outmatched. When Torvak finally pinned him to the ground with 3 arms while the 4th pressed against his throat, Ben tapped out. The arena erupted in celebration for the Courtney victory. Vorath laughed deeply as he descended to congratulate his warrior. "A good effort, human. You lasted longer than I expected. Perhaps your species is not completely worthless after all." Ben accepted the backhanded compliment with grace. Inside, he felt nothing but calm patience. He could have ended that fight in seconds. Torvak had left himself open at least 40 times during the match. But revealing that truth would have consequences far beyond this arena. 3 days later, the summit ended. The delegations returned to their homeworlds with new treaties signed and old alliances renewed. Everything seemed normal and peaceful. Then the reports started coming in. A colony on the outer edge of Confederation space went silent. When ships arrived to investigate, they found nothing but wreckage and bodies. The attackers had come without warning and left no survivors. Weapon signatures matched nothing in any known database. 2 more colonies fell within the week. Ambassador? Grant received emergency briefings from Earth, while Jake gathered his crew and prepared the Endurance for potential combat. The news was worse than anyone had imagined. A massive fleet of unknown vessels was moving through the outer territories. They called themselves the Dominion, and they had already consumed over 300 civilizations across the galaxy. Now they had found the Confederation. The Courtney responded with typical aggression. High General Vorath assembled his legendary Third Fleet, the most powerful military force the Confederation possessed. 200 warships crewed by the finest warriors of a dozen species. They jumped to intercept the Dominion at a system called Broken Gate. The battle lasted 6 hours. Not a single Confederation ship survived. The recordings were played at an emergency session on Volantos Prime. Jake watched with the other military commanders as Dominion vessels tore through the Third Fleet like it was made of paper. Courtney battlecruisers that had dominated galactic warfare for centuries were destroyed in minutes. The enemy ships were faster, stronger, and more numerous than anything anyone had prepared for. Vara stood before the assembly, his proud face twisted with grief and rage. He had lost half of his best officers and tens of thousands of warriors. For the first time in his long life, he looked like someone who had encountered something he could not defeat. "We must negotiate," said the Volanti representative. "Perhaps the Dominion can be reasoned with." "They do not negotiate," replied a Merendi admiral. "They only consume. Every species that has tried to talk with them has been destroyed." The chamber descended into chaos. Some called for surrender. Others demanded a unified military response. A few suggested fleeing to distant parts of the galaxy and hoping the Dominion would not follow. Lisa Grant remained silent through most of the arguments. She was reading encrypted messages from Earth on a secure device. Her face revealed nothing, but Jake noticed her hands were trembling slightly. Finally, she stood. The chamber fell quiet. Humans rarely spoke at these emergency sessions. They were not considered important enough to have valuable opinions. "The United Earth Government has authorized me to share something with this assembly," Lisa said. Her voice was calm and clear, carrying to every corner of the Great Hall. "For 50 years, humanity has hidden the truth about our capabilities. We have operated our ships at 30% engine capacity. Our weapons have been locked to reduce power. Our soldiers have fought with training inhibitors that limit their strength, speed, and reflexes. Silence. Complete, shocked silence. We did this because we wanted to be trusted, not feared. We had seen in our own history what happens when one group holds overwhelming power over others. We chose to present ourselves as equals rather than reveal what we truly are. Lorath stepped forward, his 4 fists clenched. You lie. This is some desperate human fantasy. Lisa turned to Jake. Commander Morrison, please contact your ship. Jake opened a communication channel to the Endurance, which was holding position in orbit. Engineer Patterson, initiate Protocol Omega. Full system unlock, all restrictions removed. In the orbital display screens that surrounded the chamber, everyone watched as the human vessel began to change. Its power signature climbed rapidly, doubling and then tripling and then climbing further still. Systems that had been dormant for 50 years came online. The ship that had seemed adequate suddenly radiated energy levels that matched a Courtney dreadnought, and it was one of their smaller vessels. We did not want this, Lisa said softly. We wanted to live in peace alongside you, as partners and friends. But the Dominion has forced us to show you what humanity really is. She looked directly at Varth. Hi, General. You asked if humans could compete as equals with the Courtney. The answer is no. We cannot. We never could. She paused, letting the words sink in. We are something far worse. The chamber erupted again, but this time the fear was directed at the humans. Every species in the room suddenly looked at the human delegation with new eyes. The soft, small, fragile creatures they had dismissed for decades were something else entirely. Something that had been hiding among them, watching and waiting. Jake understood their fear. He had grown up learning what humanity was capable of when they stopped holding back. The wars of old Earth, the weapons that could end worlds, the violence that lived in human blood, buried deep but never truly gone. Now the galaxy would learn the same terrible lesson. The Dominion had made a mistake. They had attacked a sleeping giant and expected easy prey. They had no idea what they had awakened. And neither, truly, did the Confederation. The message spread across human space at the speed of light. Protocol Omega, 2 words that every human ship captain, every soldier, every engineer had trained for but never expected to hear. The restrictions were coming off. All of them. For the first time since humanity joined the Confederation. They were going to fight at full power on the carrier Relentless. Captain Maria Santos read the authorization codes 3 times before believing them. She had commanded her ship for 12 years, always knowing that the vessel she controlled was a fraction of what it could be. Now she stood on her bridge and watched as her crew unlocked systems that had been sealed since the ship was built. Engine power at 60% and climbing, her engineer reported. 70, 80. Captain, we are approaching full capacity. The Relentless shook as power flooded through conduits that had never been fully used. Lights that had been dim for years blazed bright. Weapon systems that had seemed adequate suddenly revealed their true nature. The ship's main guns could now punch through armor that would have stopped them before. The shields could absorb punishment that would have destroyed them yesterday. Status report from the fleet, her communications officer called out. All vessels reporting successful Protocol Omega activation. We are at full combat readiness. Maria looked at the tactical display. The Dominion fleet was advancing toward the core worlds of the Confederation. Confident after their easy victory over the Courtney, they had split their forces into 3 groups, each one powerful enough to crush any resistance they expected to meet. They had no idea what was coming. Admiral Tony Reeves commanded the human response from his flagship, the Dreadnought Sovereign. It was the largest warship humanity had ever built, constructed in secret at Earth's orbital shipyard. For decades, it had sat dormant, its true capabilities hidden behind false specifications and careful deception. Now it hummed with power that made nearby Confederation sensors go dark from Overlord. Reeves was an old man with white hair and eyes that had seen too much. He had fought in the last human civil war before unity was achieved. He knew what his species was capable of when they stopped pretending to be civilized. He had hoped he would never see that side of humanity again, but hope was a luxury the Dominion had stolen from him. "All ships report ready, Admiral," his executive officer announced. "First Fleet is prepared to jump." Reeves studied the enemy positions one final time. The largest Dominion force was moving toward a system called Garden, home to 3 inhabited planets and over 10 billion civilians. If that fleet reached Garden, billions would die. "Jump coordinates locked," Reeves said quietly. "All ships, execute." The First Fleet vanished from human space and reappeared directly in the path of the Dominion advance. 50 human warships faced a force of over 300 enemy vessels. By normal calculations, it should have been a slaughter. It was just not the kind the Dominion expected. Lieutenant Commander Sam Kelly led the fighter wings that launched from the Relentless. This squadron of 20 small craft dove into the enemy formation at speeds that should have been impossible. The Dominion point defense systems could not track targets moving that fast. Sam flew through a wall of defensive fire without taking a single hit and released his missiles directly into the engine section of an enemy battlecruiser. The explosion tore the massive ship in half. "Splash one," Sam reported calmly. Moving to next target. Captain Megan Torres flew on his wing. She was younger than Sam, but just as skilled. A pilot who had spent years flying at reduced capacity and dreaming of what she could do if the restrictions were ever lifted. Now she was living that dream, her fighter dancing through enemy fire like it was standing still. She locked onto the enemy flagship and saw its main weapon array charging for a devastating blast. Without hesitation, she dove directly at the array, her fighter's weapons blazing. The enemy gun positions exploded under her assault, crippling the flagship's primary offensive capability. "Flagship weapon array destroyed," Megan reported. "They are not shooting back anymore." The main fleet engagement was equally one-sided. Human cruisers moved through the Dominion formation with terrifying speed, appearing and vanishing before enemy targeting systems could respond. Human weapons punched through Dominion armor that had stopped everything the Confederation had thrown at it. Human shields absorbed hits that should have been fatal and came back stronger. Commander Jake Morrison watched from the Endurance as his ship contributed to the massacre. He felt no joy in the destruction. Each enemy vessel destroyed was still a ship full of living beings, creatures who had families and hopes and fears just like anyone else. But the Dominion had chosen this path. They had attacked without provocation and killed without mercy. Now they were learning the cost of that choice. "Enemy fleet in full retreat," his tactical officer reported. "They are breaking formation and running." The Dominion fleet had lost 40% of its ships in 90 minutes. The survivors fled at maximum speed, abandoning their wounded and leaving debris fields that stretched across millions of kilometers. For the first time in their recorded history, the Dominion had met an enemy they could not overwhelm. Admiral Reeves watched them go. He could have pursued. His ships were fast enough to catch the fleeing enemy and finish them completely. But he let them run. "Let them go back to their masters," he said quietly. "Let them tell them what happened here. Let them spread fear." The other 2 Dominion forces received the news and halted their advance. They regrouped at the border, waiting for reinforcements and trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. Across the Confederation, species that had watched humans with contempt for 50 years now watched recordings of the battle with something very different in their eyes. The soft, weak, fragile creatures had transformed into something terrible. Their ships moved like predators. Their weapons struck like lightning. Their soldiers fought with a cold efficiency that made even the Korthani look clumsy. High General Varath requested a copy of the full battle data and studied it for hours. He had spent his entire life believing the Korthani were the supreme warriors of the galaxy. Now he watched humans do things he had thought impossible. Their tactics were brutal and precise. Their technology was generations beyond what they had shown. Their pilots performed maneuvers that would have killed any Korthani who attempted them. He thought about his sparring match with Lieutenant Carter, the young human who had lost so convincingly, who had seemed so outmatched. Varath wondered now what that fight would have looked like if Carter had not been holding back. The thought disturbed him more than he wanted to admit. On the Endurance, Jake Morrison stood alone in his quarters and looked at his own hands. The same hands that had commanded a battle resulting in the deaths of thousands. The same hands that belonged to a species capable of unimaginable destruction. He had joined the fleet because he believed in peace. He had accepted the restrictions because he understood why they were necessary. Humanity had nearly destroyed itself multiple times before learning to control its violent nature. The limits were not just protection for the galaxy. They were protection for humanity's soul. Now those limits were gone, and Jake wondered if they would ever truly come back. The Dominion was retreating, but they would return. They were too powerful and too proud to accept defeat. The real war was just beginning. And humanity was finally awake. The emergency session on Valanthos Prime was unlike anything the Confederation had experienced before. Representatives from every member species filled the great assembly hall, but this time they were not arguing about trade agreements or territorial disputes. They were trying to understand how they had lived alongside humanity for 50 years without knowing the truth. Ambassador Lisa Grant stood at the central podium, facing hundreds of alien delegates who looked at her with a mixture of fear, anger, and grudging respect. The battle recordings had spread across the Confederation, viewed billions of times by creatures who had never considered humans to be anything special. Now those same creatures were demanding explanations. "You deceived us," the Valanthi Prime Minister said. His voice was cold and controlled, but his four eyes blazed with barely contained fury. "For half a century, you pretended to be something you are not. We showed you what we hoped to become," Lisa replied calmly. "Not what we were afraid we might still be." "What does that mean?" demanded a Merendi admiral. "Speak plainly, human." Lisa took a deep breath. She had prepared for this moment her entire career, hoping it would never come. Now she had no choice but to reveal truths that humanity had kept hidden from the galaxy and sometimes from themselves. Before we achieved space travel, humanity nearly destroyed itself multiple times. We developed weapons capable of ending all life on our planet. Nuclear devices that could turn cities into ash. Biological agents that could wipe out entire populations. Machines built for nothing but killing. We came within minutes of extinction on more than one occasion. The chamber was silent. Every species had violent histories, but few had come as close to self-annihilation as Lisa was describing. When we finally united and reached the stars, we made a choice. We decided that the galaxy should never see the worst of what we could be. We built restrictions into everything. Our ships, our weapons, our soldiers. We limited ourselves to 30% of our true capability because we believed that was enough to survive while keeping us from becoming a threat to others. "You treated us like children," Varath growled. "You hid your strength because you thought we could not handle the truth." "We hid our strength because we did not trust ourselves with it," Lisa replied. "Every human soldier trains to full capacity. They know what they can do. But they fight with limiters because the alternative is becoming the monsters we used to be. The restrictions are not about protecting you from us. They are about protecting us from ourselves. Dr. Nick Palmer stepped forward. He was a xenopsychologist who had spent 20 years studying how different species processed aggression and violence. He had also spent those years hiding what his research had revealed about humanity. "I have data that I was never authorized to share," Nick said. "Studies comparing human aggression to every other known species. The results are disturbing." He activated a display that showed graphs and measurements from thousands of experiments. The numbers told a story that made even the Corthony uncomfortable. Human baseline aggression falls within normal parameters for most intelligent species. However, when humans perceive existential threat, something changes. We call it the survival response. Old instincts from millions of years of evolution activate simultaneously. Speed increases by 40%. Strength increases by similar amounts. Pain tolerance becomes nearly unlimited. Fear is suppressed entirely. Nick pointed to a specific measurement on the display. This scale measures combat effectiveness under extreme stress. Most species show moderate increases when threatened. Corthony warriors, long considered the most dangerous fighters in the galaxy, show a factor of 3 improvement. Humans show a factor of 12. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. "We were prey animals on our homeworld," Nick continued. "Small, weak, without natural weapons or armor. We survived by learning to become more dangerous than anything hunting us. That ability never left our blood. We simply learned to bury it, deep enough that we could build civilizations instead of burning them." Marath stepped forward, his ancient face twisted with emotions even he could not name. "I fought one of your soldiers. Lieutenant Carter. He lost to my warrior in the arena." "He lost because he chose to lose," Lisa said. "Ben Carter is one of our most capable fighters. In a real combat situation, without restrictions, he would have been extremely difficult for your warrior to defeat. Show me." Varth's voice was barely above a whisper. "I wish to see what a human fights like when they are not pretending." The request was granted. Lieutenant Carter met Varth in a private training room aboard the Endurance. No audience, no recordings, just 2 warriors and the truth between them. "I do not wish to harm you," Ben said as they faced each other. "I am Corthony," Varth replied. "I have survived battles that would have killed your entire species. Do not insult me with concern." Ben nodded slowly. He closed his eyes for a moment, and something changed in his posture. The friendly, unassuming young man disappeared. What remained was something older, something that had been sleeping behind his eyes for years. He opened his eyes, and Varth saw nothing human in them at all. The match lasted 4 seconds. Ben moved so fast that Varth's enhanced cybernetic eyes could not track him. The Corthony general felt impacts on his armor, but could not see the strikes that caused them. His forearms swept through empty air as his opponent flowed around them like water. Before his ancient combat instincts could even engage, Varth found himself on the ground with Ben's hand positioned precisely at the gap in his throat armor where a single strike would be fatal. The human held that position for a heartbeat, then stepped back. The predator disappeared from his eyes, replaced by the young officer Varth had dismissed so easily weeks before. "I am sorry," Ben said quietly. "I know that was not pleasant to experience." Varth lay on the ground for a long moment, processing what had happened. In 300 years of combat, he had never been defeated so completely. He had never felt so utterly helpless. For the first time in his life, he understood what prey felt like. "How do you live with it?" Varth asked finally. "How do you carry that inside you every day and still pretend to be civilized?" Ben helped him to his feet. "We remember what happens when we let it control us. We remember the wars and the weapons, and the billions who died before we learned to be better. The restrictions are not chains, High General. They are choices. Every day, every human chooses to be more than what our nature demands. Vareth stood in silence, looking at the young human who had just demonstrated the capacity to kill him in seconds. He thought about his own species, proud warriors who defined themselves by their strength and ferocity. The Korthni had always believed that power was something to be displayed, celebrated, feared. Humans believed power was something to be hidden, controlled, and used only when absolutely necessary. For the first time in his long life, Vareth wondered which philosophy was actually stronger. He reached out with one of his 4 hands and grasped Ben's shoulder. "I underestimated your people," Vareth said. "I will not make that mistake again." It was not quite an apology, but from a Korthni High General, it was something far more valuable. It was respect. The Dominion gathered everything they had. Every warship from every conquered territory, every soldier from every subjugated species, every weapon system they had collected across 300 civilizations. The fleet that assembled at the border of Confederation space was the largest military force ever recorded in galactic history. Over 2,000 vessels carrying millions of warriors, all commanded by the Archon himself. The Archon was ancient, even by the standards of immortal beings. He had led the Dominion for over 10,000 years, consuming civilization after civilization without ever facing true resistance. His body had been modified and enhanced until he was more machine than organic. A towering figure of dark metal and burning energy, who had forgotten what fear felt like. He would remember soon. The Dominion fleet moved toward the garden world of Serenity, home to 40 billion civilians from 12 different Confederation species. The message was clear: surrender or watch this beautiful world burn. The Archon expected the same response he had received from every other civilization: panic, negotiation, and eventually submission. Admiral Tony Reeves responded with a single transmission, broadcast on all frequencies. "This is Admiral Reeves of the United Earth Navy. The world behind us contains 40 billion innocent lives. We will not retreat. We will not surrender. If you want serenity, you will have to come through us." "And what happens then?" The Archon replied, his voice carrying the weight of millennia. "You defeated one of my fleets with your tricks and your hidden weapons. Do you think you can defeat all of us?" "I think," Reeves said quietly, "that you have made a terrible mistake." The human fleet above Serenity numbered less than 100 vessels. The Confederation had contributed another 50 ships, including a Korthni battle group commanded by High General Vareth himself. Together, they faced a force that outnumbered them more than 10 to 1. Reeves turned to his communications officer. "Signal all human forces. Full unrestricted combat is authorized. Remove all limiters. Hold nothing back." Across the human fleet, soldiers removed the neural inhibitors that had kept their bodies operating at reduced capacity. Engineers disabled the final safety protocols on weapons and engines. Pilots took deep breaths and let the ancient instincts they had suppressed their entire lives rise to the surface. Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Endurance and felt the change sweep through his crew. The atmosphere shifted from professional calm to something harder, colder. His people were still themselves, still the men and women he had served with for years. But they were also something else now. Something older. Something that had been waiting in human blood since the first of their ancestors picked up a rock and decided to stop running from predators. "All systems at maximum," his engineer Claire Patterson reported. Her voice was flat, emotionless. "We are ready." "All hands," Jake announced. "This is the commander. Today, we fight for 40 billion lives that cannot fight for themselves. Today, we show the Dominion what happens when they threaten those under our protection. Today, we remind the galaxy why humanity chose to hide what we are. He paused, looking at the endless sea of enemy ships filling his display. Because what we are is terrifying. The battle began. Human ships tore into the Dominion formation like wolves among sheep. They moved with impossible coordination, each vessel covering the others while finding gaps in enemy defenses. Dominion weapons that had devastated the Corthony Third Fleet now struck human shields and accomplished nothing. Human weapons that had seemed barely adequate now punched through Dominion armor like it was made of paper. Lieutenant Commander Sam Kelly led his fighter squadron in an assault on the enemy flagship. Dominion interceptors swarmed to stop them, but Sam and his pilots danced through the defensive fire with movements that seemed to violate physics. Captain Megan Torres flew directly into the flagship's hangar bay and unleashed her weapons on the vessels stored inside, creating a chain reaction that gutted the massive ship from within. "Flagship is crippled," Megan reported. "The Archon is still alive. His escape shuttle is launching." "I see him," Jake replied from the Endurance. "He is mine." The Endurance broke from the main engagement and pursued the Archon's shuttle toward a massive Dominion battle station at the center of the fleet. Jake knew the ancient conqueror was trying to reach his command center, where he could coordinate his forces and possibly activate weapons too powerful to use from a normal vessel. Jake was not going to let that happen. "Boarding teams to shuttles," he ordered. "We're going in." 20 human Marines followed Jake into the battle station. They moved through corridors filled with Dominion soldiers, creatures from dozens of conquered species who had been forced to serve their masters. The fighting was brutal and constant, but the humans advanced without stopping. Private Beth Collins was the youngest member of the team, barely 19 years old and on her first real combat deployment. When a corridor junction brought them under fire from over 100 enemies, Beth stepped forward and held the position alone. Her rifle became an extension of her will, finding targets with mechanical precision. Her body moved through enemy fire with grace that seemed impossible. 7 minutes? She held that corridor against overwhelming numbers until reinforcements arrived. When it was over, Beth had taken 17 wounds from various weapons. She was still standing. Every single enemy who had faced her was not. Jake reached the command center and found the Archon waiting. The ancient being towered over the human commander, his mechanical body bristling with weapons and his eyes burning with fury that had been building for 10,000 years. "You cannot defeat me," the Archon said. "I have conquered 300 civilizations. I have destroyed species that existed before your world had life. I am eternal." Jake drew his combat blade. It seemed absurd, a human with a knife facing a mechanical god. But Jake had stopped thinking about odds hours ago. He had stopped thinking about survival. All that remained was the mission and the cold certainty that filled every cell of his body. "You were eternal," Jake replied. "Now you are a lesson." The fight was fast and vicious. The Archon's weapons fired beams of energy that could cut through starship hulls. Jake moved through them like smoke, his enhanced reflexes pushing his body beyond anything the Archon's targeting systems could track. He closed the distance in seconds and drove his blade into the weak point where the Archon's mechanical head joined his mechanical body. The ancient conqueror fell. Jake stood over the corpse of a being who had terrorized the galaxy for 10,000 years. He felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a deep weariness and a desperate hope that this was the last time humanity would have to become what they truly were. The Dominion fleet surrendered within hours. Without the Archon, their chain of command collapsed. The subjugated species that made up most of their forces turned against their masters, seizing ships and offering to join the Confederation. The empire that had seemed unstoppable fragmented overnight. In the aftermath, the Galactic Confederation faced a question that had no easy answer. How could they exist alongside a species capable of what humanity had just demonstrated. The humans had saved them all, but they had also revealed themselves as perhaps the most dangerous creatures in known space. Ambassador Lisa Grant addressed the assembly one final time. "We could rule this galaxy," she said simply. "Our ships are faster. Our weapons are stronger. Our soldiers are more effective than anything any of you possess. If we wanted to become the next Dominion, no one could stop us." She paused, letting the fear her words created settle over the chamber. "But we do not want that. We never wanted that. The restrictions we built for ourselves were not just strategy. They were a promise. A promise that we would never let our capacity for destruction define who we are." She looked at Varth, who nodded slowly. "Today, we put the restrictions back in place. Our ships will return to 30% power. Our soldiers will reactivate their limiters. Our weapons will be locked down again. Not because you force us to, but because that is who we choose to be. And if another threat emerges..." The Volanthi Prime Minister asked. Lisa smiled softly. "Then we will wake up again. We will do what must be done to protect the innocent. And when the danger passes, we will go back to sleep. That is the promise humanity makes to this confederation." The new charter was signed within weeks. Humanity took its place not as conquerors, but as protectors. The sleeping giants who chose to dream of peace rather than impose their nightmares on others. High General Vorath visited Jake on the Endurance before returning to Corthony space. They stood together on the observation deck, watching the stars. "I still do not fully understand your people," Vorath admitted. "You possess power beyond anything I have ever seen, yet you choose to chain yourselves." Jake smiled. "A wise human once said that the measure of a person is not what they can do, but what they choose not to do. We could burn the galaxy. Instead, we choose to protect it. That choice is what makes us human." Vorath was silent for a long moment. Then he extended one of his 4 hands. "I was wrong about your species," he said. "You are not weak. You are the strongest people I have ever met. Because strength that is controlled is far more impressive than strength that is unleashed." Jake shook his hand. "An alliance forged in fire, tempered by truth, and built